Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So this is our second webinar in our fall series, and we welcome you all. Today's topic is on responding to childhood trauma, building resiliency in our children. So traumatic experiences not only impact young children emotionally, but they also impact their ability to learn, and trauma is a risk factor for nearly all behavioral health disorders. And early intervention can assist in reducing the impact and, in many cases, help children recover from traumatic experiences. So, early childhood educators can play a vital role in their recovery. So, this webinar will offer some facts related to the impact of early childhood trauma on a young child's brain development, some guidance and strategies to support young children, thus helping to prevent and minimize trauma. Now, having said this, before I move on to the next slide, I just want to do a very quick sound check here just to make sure everyone can hear me okay. And if anyone's experiencing any audio issues, can you just type it in the chat box? Looks like no one's having issues, so I will continue. So this webinar is being brought to you by the Source for Learning. Source for Learning is a nonprofit organization located in Reston, Virginia. Here at SFL, we are committed to growing and empowering the early childhood educators. We offer support for practical learning and implementation of beneficial strategies in early childhood program settings. SFL is an established online creator, compiler, and curator of high-quality learning assets for almost 40 years. SFL's ECE initiatives offers free professional learning webinars, such as this one, featuring trending topics presented by experts in the field who have a great deal of hands-on experience. And we also offer an online administrator credentialing program known as VAE-CAP for early childhood educators in the state of Virginia. So just to very quickly, we'll go over the control panel. So on your right-hand side of your monitor, you should see a control panel. At any point you would like to submit a question to our presenters, feel free to type it in. Please know at certain points we will certainly ask those questions to our presenters. Sometimes we are able to ask them right away, and at other times we wait until it's a good time for us to connect with them. But please feel free to submit your questions as it comes to your mind. So let's get social. If you can also spread the word, we would certainly appreciate it. On social media, you can use hashtags such as hashtag ECE, ECE Professional, and ECE Webinar. So I would very much like to introduce our presenters of today's webinar, and we are so very happy to have Mary Braxton with us. Mary is an early childhood TA specialist and has received training on trauma and resilience from John Richardson Love, Director of Mental and Led Trauma and Resilience Educator with Child Savers in Richmond, Virginia. And as part of her TA specialist role, Mary provides trauma and resiliency training in various areas in Virginia. So we are really very happy to have Mary today as our presenter. And along with Mary, we have Tony. And many of you already have joined for Tony's webinars as well. So Tony, again, requires no introduction because she is pretty well known, at least here in the state of Virginia in our field. However, Tony has been very involved at the state level as well as at the national level with a lot of advocacy work. And currently, she also sits on our SFL board as well as she is an adjunct professor at Tidewater Community College, and she is a retired CEO of Children's Harbor. And with that, I would like to introduce myself. I am Kamna Seth. I'm Senior Director here at the Source for Learning, and I oversee the ECE initiatives. Along with me, supporting today's presenters, I have Shireen Ali. Shireen is education specialist here, and she is part of our ECE initiatives team. So with that, we are here to learn about today's objectives, and I will pass it on to Tony.
Good afternoon, everybody. So today's objectives, we're going to acquire some facts about childhood trauma and its impact on brain development. We're going to learn about some typical traumas that young children experience and how to identify some of those signs. And then we're going to obtain strategies to prevent or minimize trauma and its triggers to support young children in the classroom setting. Next slide. As we move forward in this session, trauma-informed care is a term that's being used frequently, and this whole session is about that. And trauma-informed care is about practices that promote a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. So we're going to go through the basics of trauma. We're going to define it. We're going to understand the impact of trauma on brain development. We're going to learn how childhood trauma is responded to and stored pre-verbally. And then we're going to identify some of those behavioral signs of trauma. So next slide. And Mary?
Okay. Trauma is an individual response to an event or enduring condition which we experience or perceive to be a threat to life, body, to ourselves, or to a caregiver, family member that overwhelms our ability to function, causing adverse effects on our well-being. As we define trauma, we also need to understand why it matters. Between 1995 and 1997, Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention recruited participants for a study known as ACE, or Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. They looked at 10 questions that the participants may have been exposed to during their childhood. This study showed that there was a link between the trauma experienced during childhood and chronic diseases that people often develop as adults. It also showed a connection between social emotional problems. However, it's very important to understand and remember that it is not a final destination. The key to understanding what the impact can be and building on coping skills and resiliency will make a positive impact. The full study can be found on many of the resources we share at the end of this presentation, as well as on the Center for Disease and Control website. Next slide. So as we look at the different types of trauma, it's also important to understand that trauma can be experienced in many ways and is individualized to that child. It is not what we see as being traumatic. It is what the child sees and feels as being traumatic. We need to understand that it leaves a feeling of helplessness, powerlessness, which can also impact behaviors, interactions, and learning. Most children that have been exposed to trauma have experienced more than one type of trauma. So looking at the slide, there is simple event trauma, which is a one-time experience, such as a fire or a car accident. There is complex trauma, which is often planned, ongoing. It involves relationships, and it involves challenges with trust, shame, self-esteem, identity, and self-regulation. It occurs normally in relationships that the child has, and then an example would be physical abuse from a parent or a sibling. And we also need to look at attachment trauma, which is the disruption of bonding between an infant or child and of that primary caregiver. This type of trauma may include abuse or neglect, and it may be less obvious, such as a lack of responding from the caregiver or a lack of affection. And examples of this would be the infant that is not held, or perhaps the infant who cries and is not responded to. All of these impact the safety and feelings of security, as well as social and emotional development, and the ability to trust and form relationships, which can make it very difficult for these children in programs that they are in daily. Next slide.
So the brain it develops in a specific sequence from the most basic parts to the most complex ones. The brain stem begins developing first, followed by the cerebellum, and then the limbic system, and then finally the cerebral cortex. The fact that the limbic system develops before the cortex is important. The brain can process and store emotional experiences long before the child has the language and memory skills to consciously remember and discuss emotions. This means that if an infant's brain can store and remember a frightening experience and can use that information to react to a similar event later, even if the infant cannot remember or talk about that experience, the limbic system is the seat of positive memories as well and stores happy experiences that build attachments with adult caregivers. Trauma-induced changes to the brain can result in varying degrees of cognitive impairment, emotional dysregulation. It can also lead to a host of problems, including things like difficulty with attention and focus and learning disabilities, low self-esteem, impaired social skills, and sleep disturbances. Next slide.
Dr. Bruce Perry is an American psychiatrist that is also a lead in the Child Trauma Academy, which is a nonprofit organization based in Texas. He has numerous books, podcasts, and studies that can be found online, and is also well known for his work in the field. Children are not resilient, they are malleable, meaning that children do have the ability to recover from those experiences, which is why what we do with each child makes a difference. And we also know that this is best practice in all early learning programs. Looking at the slide, the star bullets are positive development points and what we know takes place in the brain. Below that, it shows us how traumatic experiences can impact and interfere with the brain development that needs to take place. Trauma and the impact of trauma interferes with the capacity to regulate emotions and reactions, and this interference creates the inability to control anger and impulses. We need to assist with the capacity to integrate sensory, emotional, and cognitive information into a cohesive picture for these children. A chaotic environment will result in unfocused and irrelevant responses to subsequent stress. Next slide. It's also important to understand that the brain is wired for survival. Trauma events heighten the imprinting and interfere with healthy brain development and connections. The ACE study has linked trauma to psychological studies to the adult, and continued trauma will organize a child's brain in an unhealthy manner. The body initially responds to trauma or a traumatic event is that their body will release, they feel a sense of threat, therefore there will be a release of energy throughout the body, and we want to make sure that we assist with that taking place in a positive manner and not a negative manner. Next slide.
Hi, Mary. A question
Yes.
just came in. Just wanted to see if you can repeat which study did you mention?
The ACE study.
Yeah.
ACE.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
And it's also known as adverse childhood experiences.
Thank you.
We're going to go to a poll question. If you could, please answer. We're going to ask you, what do you think the body's normal response to trauma? Your choices are going to be screaming, running, shock, or all of the above. So if you would please pick an answer. We're going to take about 20 seconds here for you to look through. But what is the body's normal response to trauma? Screaming, running, shock, or all of the above? take about another 15 seconds. I hope everybody's had an opportunity to respond. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the results. So 1% said screaming, 1% said running, 13% shock, and 87% of you said all of the above. And so we're going to turn it back over to Mary to talk about that.
Okay, so as we do the poll and look at those results, it's important to mention that shock is an initial reaction to any type of trauma. For an individual with coping skills, there's a process of releasing that initial response or reaction that the body has, which is initially shock. And the area of freezing, that shock never leaves, it basically remains. However, as adults, we often refer to working through something, and that is known also as the cycle of using our coping skills and our resiliency to move past that initial response that our body has. However, a child has not learned these skills, and trauma interferes with their ability to work through that process, cope, or adapt. For a child without skills to work through anything, it leads to behaviors such as aggression, assertiveness, avoiding or withdrawing. And the excess survival energy, which has a negative impact on the body and brain, is being released into the body and is also being stored in the brain. So again, the first response is to react, and we react in fight, flight, or freeze. And it's the coping skills and resiliency that needs to be taught to those children as part of the cycle to work through and work through a healthy process. During the body's arousal to threat, these states or instincts exist to protect ourselves, and that's what the children need to learn to work through. It's important to understand that there's going to be a natural cycle and that the connections and the release of energy are naturally going to happen. So the goal is to assist the children with it taking place in a way that is healthiest and most beneficial and positive. Dr. Levine talks a lot about how this emotional and instinctual brain work together for a completion of this cycle, and this is called pendulation, and we will discuss this more as the presentation goes on. Next slide. So let's look at how trauma is stored, and we know that our memory and our procedural memory, everything is stored in our brain from birth. Core experiences of trauma are disempowerment and disconnection, and we need to understand that this is not only important, but that without building resiliency and creating a more trauma-informed environment, we could be re-traumatizing the child, or the child could seek out what is familiar, such as sensations, feelings, or chaos. And this is because this is what they are comfortable with. So it's important to show them another way and to make it a part of the routine and environment consistently, not only when they are having a hard time. An example of this is shared in some of the resources that we provide at the end of the webinar. I'm going to share with you some pieces of the story of Henry, and this is an example of somebody going back to what is familiar. When Henry was a child, he moved a couple of times when he was young, which means there was a change of familiar settings, familiar rules, and his support system and environment. He grew up in a home with a lot of arguing between his parents, but one day his parents were arguing, and his dad picked up a baseball bat and struck his mom in the head as Henry watched from behind the couch. His mom died, his dad went to jail, and Henry entered the foster care system and was moved from home to home. One day, Henry came home from school and he found his foster parents fighting. In his mind, he recalled that night and that childhood experience that he saw from behind the couch. He hit his father in the head the same way he watched his father hit his mother in the head as a young child. The fighting had triggered him to resort to what he knew. However, had he learned coping skills, he would not have gone back to what he had experienced. So it's important to understand that if the rules or what is expected and accepted are not clear or are blurry to a child, at that time of reacting, they will come up with their own rules based on what they've experienced and what is familiar to him. But we can help every child, and we can do this by teaching resiliency and coping skills. And we need to realize that what we do plays a very large role in what is stored and assisting the creating healthier links and connections within each and every child. Next slide. So there is a book called The Body Keeps Score, and it's a great resource to have on hand. In that book, there is a story about the event that happened on 9/11 at the World Trade Center and Building Number 5. Building Number 5 was across the street from the World Trade Center, and it had a child care program inside. On 9/11, all of the children were safe. However, they obviously saw and heard a lot. One little boy in particular was asked to draw a picture for a psychiatrist to show what he saw on that day. In his picture, which had the buildings, fire, smoke, and airplane, he also drew black dots all over the paper. He told the psychiatrist that these were all of the people falling and jumping from the building. He drew a very large black hole on the bottom of that paper, and he referred to that as the trampoline, because if they were falling and jumping from so high up, they needed a safe place to land. This child created his own coping skill to handle what he had experienced. However, not every child is able to do that. So each and every one of us is a child's trampoline, and we assist daily with the skills that they need to develop. Next slide.
We are at another poll question. The question is, have you worked with children that have experienced trauma? So the choices for you are going to be yes, you have, no, you haven't, or you're not sure, now that you're hearing some of this information. So have you worked with children that have experienced trauma? Yes, no, or not sure. Take another 10 or 15 seconds to answer that. All right, we will look at the results. Wow, 80% of you have said that you have worked with children experiencing trauma. 7% said no, and then 13% said not sure. That's a fairly large population of folks. And with what we know and what Mary's going to share with some of the statistics, this isn't surprising. Sad, but not surprising. So we'll go on to the next slide, Mary.
Okay, so 80% of you say that you have worked with children who have experienced trauma. And as sad as that is, it does fall in line with the statistics that we know, which is that 1 in 4 children will experience trauma of some kind by the age of 4. Because of this, it's important to understand what trauma means and realize that we don't really know what every child has experienced and what they have not experienced. Therefore, we need to make changes that benefit all children. In the slide, there are asterisks next to accident and illness and medical procedure. These are basically what we used to think of when we heard trauma. We thought it referred to surgery or cancer, broken arms, or injuries from an accident or illness. And our thoughts and understanding of trauma stopped there. But let's take a look at the other item, because this is basically what trauma is and what's being experienced by our children. We also have cultural and refugee and relocation stories that are now being connected to the ACE studies, and they're mentioned repeatedly in the news and in reports. And what's common about everything on this slide and all types of trauma are the feelings of helplessness and harm. We need to remember that trauma is an individual response to something that they have experienced, witnessed, been exposed to. And as an example, as a child, I received a B on my report card in math, and my dad wanted to know why I did not receive an A. It was the only B that I had received on my report card, and my dad handed it back to me without saying another word and walked away. And as a result, all through school, I battled with major anxiety when it came to math, and that was even in my adult years, taking math courses. Next slide. Okay, so let's look at the physical signs of trauma. And we mentioned that with trauma, disassociation occurs. Part of this results in energy being locked internally, which is also known as hypoarousal. And signs and examples of hypoarousal will include being withdrawn, feelings of emptiness, detachment or boredom, apathy or not caring, inattention, and being very tired. Energy is outwardly shown, and that is known as hyperarousal. And examples of hyperarousal will include an increase in heart rate, rapid shallow breathing, cold sweats, worrying, racing mind or thoughts, tension of muscles, and repeated intrusive thoughts. Basically, our nervous system and the child's nervous system, it accelerates. And with hypoarousal, the nervous system begins to shut down. Next slide. So now let's look at emotional signs of emotional trauma. And as we look at emotional signs of trauma, it's important to realize that both hyperarousal and hypoarousal are intensely painful and very uncomfortable states for the child. You may have children who withdraw, or you may have children who show more aggressive or outward behaviors as ways of coping. You may notice a clinginess or an avoidance of wanting to do anything in a group. They may only want to do something on their own. And it's very important to understand that there may be reasons behind some of these behaviors. Next slide. Okay, as we look at the signs of cognitive signs of trauma, we need to keep in mind that these may also be signs of other things. So we want to keep in mind things and keep up with early intervention, screening tools, assessments. Also make sure that you document and date anything that you may see. This is only additional information for you to add to what you already know and understand. And it's basically just another layer of knowledge. It's not to take the place of any knowledge that you already have. So with cognitive signs, you may notice problems with speech. They may stutter, or they may not be able to express any ideas or thoughts. Their communication sometimes may freeze to where they just can't put words to their emotions and what they're trying to say. They may lie. Hypervigilance or hyperarousal is an increased sensory sensitivity, which usually includes an exaggerated intensity of behaviors. It's usually seen outwardly as anxiety, but inside there are other things that child is experiencing. It could also be seen as a child who's constantly scanning the room, looking for things that may harm them, or just a very fearful, jumpy child. And with intrusive thoughts, the child may be rethinking the trauma or looking for reminders of that trauma reoccurring. Increased anxiety is often part of many of the cognitive signs of trauma. Next slide. As we look at the behavioral signs of trauma. It's also important to mention that many medications for ADHD, including Ritalin, they often have the opposite effect on a child who has experienced trauma. So instead of calming the child down, it will do the opposite, or instead of helping the child focus, it does the complete opposite. And that's something that's very important to understand, because as we go through, or as that child is going through the process of possibly being evaluated and being put on medication, it's important to notice any changes in the behavior that that child has and document that. Next slide.
So the effects of trauma we're going to talk about next. The effects on young children, including trauma and attachment, and trauma and learning. So next slide.
Okay, so trauma affects the thinking and causes the thinking to be disorganized. It's an unfortunate reality that a child's adaptive responses to survive in a chaotic environment creates a disadvantage outside of that context. And that is a quote by Dr. Perry. Calmer environments are the key to assisting the children, and we know that this is also best practice for all children. This includes our interactions with the children, as well as responding to the child and where they are, and rather than reacting to that child's behaviors. Next slide. Children are in a state of fear, and they will retrieve information from the world differently than when they are calm. So when trauma is unresolved, they are automatically activated by their procedural memories, and they are not able to use their cortex. Therefore, we're going to see them react more impulsively, and they may not know why. If we ask them why they're doing something, it's important to understand when they look at us and they can't answer that question, they honestly have no answer to that question. Next slide. So these children are prone to experience anything novel, including rules and other protective interventions, such as punishments. So what would a calmer classroom look like and feel like to these children? It would look flexible and it would feel flexible. Teachers would be flexible, and children may get a little more time and freedom that they would benefit from. They would have boundaries, but those boundaries would also come with understanding and of a responsive early childhood educator. Next slide. It's not that they don't want to behave, they can't. It's important to understand when trauma is unresolved, they are automatically activated into the procedural memories and can't cortex. They need the trampoline that we offer them and the assistance and support we can provide by helping them to develop those coping skills. Next slide.
So we are now going to go into
Tony?
some support.
Tony?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have you pause here for a second. A question has come in. Perhaps, Mary, you can answer this. Someone has asked whether the emotional aspects to trauma, is it only relevant, whatever you have shared so far, is it relevant only to very young children, or has, or it's also relevant to school-age children as well?
It would be relevant to school-age children as well.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tony, I can let you take it on from here.
Yeah, and also some of the trauma studies have shown that not only children, but as adults, teens and adults, react to some of these things that are trauma. So, it's not limited to an age. So we are now going to look at some support and some strategies to support young children. So next slide.
So basically, what can we do? We need to create and ensure a safe, stable, responsive environment for every child. And we need to make sure that we are not setting unrealistic expectations of ourselves or on the children. It's important to create new connections and positive relationships within a calm environment while still establishing a sense of boundaries and routines that child will know is there and can start to feel safe and secure in. Next slide. Our system feeds their system, so it's extremely important to not become absorbed into their chaos. We need to create a calm environment, develop routines, and create calmness that the children can then absorb into themselves. The positive relationships that we are creating are also helping to develop a healthy brain and the release of healthy energy into their bodies. Next slide. And it's important, again, to understand that this is something we can do for all children, all ages. And these are the same things that young adults and even adults we need as part of our environment. We need assistance in becoming calm, confident, and compassionate. And as adults, many of us may have already, we have that, and we know to surround ourselves with that. But as children or as somebody who has experienced trauma, they do not know this, and they don't have this. So therefore, it has to be created for them. Next slide.
We're going to look at another poll question. And the question is for you, the question is for you to pick a classroom design that you think will help children in experiencing trauma. So in an early childhood program, what would that classroom potentially look like? And so your choices are minimize sensory stimuli, include personal, familial, cultural items, provide soft, cozy, alone, one-on-one spaces, offer natural and sensory materials, and allow for movement indoors and outdoors. Which of these items do you think will help children who are experiencing trauma? It'll take about 10 more seconds for you to answer the question. All right, let's go ahead and see what our results were. The 52, so 41 said minimize, and you're actually between the 40s and the 68%. So you're given kind of an equal footing on almost all of those within just a few percentage points. And we're going to talk in a little bit about each one of those and how, yes, all of those actually do help. So it's good to see that split. And we're going to go to the next slide, but then we will talk about the classroom design. So next slide. In this next section, we're going to talk about trauma-informed care and what we can do for all children. So trauma-informed care, as I said in the very beginning, was practices that promote a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. And have we not moved to the next slide, Kamna? We are going to take and make universal precautions as one thing we can do. We're going to look at classroom environment considerations. We're going to look at social climate strategies. We're going to talk a little bit about some psychological first aid, and then we're going to build support at your program. What kinds of things can you do to help build support at your program? So, next slide. Hello? Amna?
Oh,
Hi, Tony. Yes, we
Yes.
are. I don't know, perhaps there may be a delay on your end, but
Okay.
the
So we're at the
screen,
next
unless,
slide.
you know what?
okay.
Oh, I know what happened
There
here.
we go.
Sorry. I forgot to close the poll altogether. That's what happened. So my
Okay.
apologies. We're all good now.
Okay.
Okay. So
So maybe
let's look at universal precautions and what trauma-informed care is and what we can do for all children. What do we mean by universal precautions? It's practices that promote a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing for all children, and caring about why they may be doing what they are doing. We need to understand that it's not a matter of what is wrong with you. We need to think to ourselves what has happened to you. And we need to promote resiliency within these children. It is responding to the need of that child rather than reacting. Universal precautions and trauma-informed care involve us understanding what triggers are so we can work to prevent the behaviors or re-traumatizing the child. It's an approach that benefits all children and its best practices. And it actively supports the healing process in those children that have experienced trauma. What else can we do for all children? We can identify and build upon our knowledge and personal strengths by using resources. Promoting resiliency should be a part of every classroom and every program to benefit every child. And we know that that is actually best practice. It's also important to understand that how we speak and how we listen to each and every child will simply say, I love you and I will protect you. Next slide.
So we're going to talk about that classroom design. And again, everybody chose parts of all of these. So you want to make sure you do minimize that sensory stimuli to be able to improve focus using things with light colors, calm colors, that visuals and displays and materials, there's not too much, and that it's organized. You also want to include personal, familiar, cultural items, things like pictures of family members, objects and items that might be familiar to the children that you might not typically have in your classroom. You want to make sure that you're setting up defined areas and that they're organized and easy to navigate so that it isn't confusing. Provide soft, cozy alone one-on-one spaces, and making sure that those spaces are part of the normal routine so that children who need to use this space won't feel uncomfortable and that it's not considered something that everybody's doing at different points in time during the day. You want to promote independence and choices. That helps build the psychosocial skills in children. And again, is just very standard best practice for what we offer children. Excuse me. You want to offer natural and sensory materials. We know that research has shown that children who have access to natural materials help keep children calm. And then you can add the use of the sensory treasure chest. Levin has one that has a cornucopia of ideas, strategies, and concepts that also addresses sensory, communication, physical, and social emotional issues. The allowing for more movement. The overall increase in gross motor is good for running, jumping, but it also improves balance in children and gives them some physical strength that they might need. You're going to foster community in one-on-one small groups so that you're going to help them build those social skills in small doses that children might be able to handle. You want to make sure that they have that ability. And then children that are traumatized will drink more water. And when they drink more water, then they need to use the bathroom more frequently. So that's just something that you might want to consider and know that that might be happening with children, and be aware that children might have a need to go to the bathroom more frequently. And so just keeping that in mind. Okay, next slide.
So as we look at the social environment, we need to understand that every child basically walks into those environments and they are with us every day with the underlying question of who will care for me and am I safe? We need to establish routines that are predictable, and that means the morning as well as the afternoon routines. We need to focus on and create the environment for every child because children should sense that they are both welcome and secure. We need to pay attention to separations as well as transitional time. A question to reflect on is actually in a fantastic quote by Maurice Skykes. Is there place for me? Is there a space for me? And is there grace for me? And we need to make sure that we're creating all of that daily. We need to observe and look for triggers that are both ongoing as well as transient issues and make sure that we're documenting what's taking place. Taking universal precautions for all children and understanding that as adults, we don't know what we don't know. And as children, not only do they not know what they don't know, but they're not capable of doing what they've never been taught how to do. So they can't practice and they can't show what they've never experienced or what they aren't repeatedly shown and have not repeatedly been exposed to or a part of. They will instead go to what is known and what is familiar to them. It's also important to look at play when children are playing, to realize that it allows self-control as well as power, safety, processing, and independence. And those hands-on experiences are incredibly important. And as Tony mentioned about the sensory treasure chest, make sure that our sensory items and experiences include all 5 senses, because not every child will benefit from using the same sensory skill. Next slide. As we look at the next slide, we want to make sure that we keep in mind that we need to use a soft, calm, and neutral, non-threatening voice. We need to set clear and firm limits, but we also need to allow for a little bit of flexibility and understanding. We need to show kindness and also teach children kindness by providing nurturing lessons to support understanding what that is. It's important to understand and realize that children who have experienced trauma, they do not understand empathy. So just keep that in mind as you're doing lessons and activities in the classroom and in the early childhood environment. Character development activities can assist with learning about kindness, compassion, empathy, and these other key traits that can assist all children. Understand that hydration, as Tony mentioned, is extremely important. Thirst can lead to a loss of 10% of cognition, and it can also be a reason for behaviors that you are wanting to assist children with in the classroom. It's important to increase movement that helps to alert and or regulate their system. That includes stretching. Yoga is fantastic because it assists with movement, but it also assists with breathing. And if we increase deep breathing activities and make it part of the routine that they do daily, don't just make it a part of what you do if you need to calm down. The children aren't going to know how to do any of those activities if you don't make it a routine part of their day. And as Tony mentioned, it's important to understand that body elimination is an automatic stress response to some children. So you may notice children experiencing more stress may also be the child needing more bathroom breaks or more breaks for water. Next slide. So what can we do other than many of us use to smell the flowers and blow out the candle, and use touch when accepted. We want to make sure that we get permission before we touch. Some children don't want to be touched. Some children do not want to be hugged. So that may actually make it more difficult for them. One quick breathing activity that you can do, if you open your mouth and put your tongue on the back of your bottom teeth and breathe in through your mouth slowly and out of your mouth slowly. And again, the front of your tongue is on the back of your bottom teeth up against it. And what that does is it allows the cool air to come in and out off of your tongue. And very often that is very calming for children and for adults as well. Next slide.
So we're going to now talk about some healing trauma in young children. So next slide.
So it's important to understand that a child reacts to what is taking place, and with that initial fight, flight, freeze response. That's the first initial reaction. And as we try to teach them to work through it, it's going to be the coping skills and the resiliency and the calming environments that are going to help build that coping and resiliency and that sense of a trampoline for these children. Next slide. To heal from trauma, the child must complete the cycle in the presence of a calm, confident, compassionate container, and that is what we are. As mentioned previously, the initial response is fight, flight, or freeze, and once trauma is experienced, it's held inside. This can impact the body, the brain development, relationships, behaviors, and overall health and other factors, both short-term and long-term. And again, it's the coping skills and resiliency that we help to foster within the children that assist in the completion of the cycle of processing and rebuilding within that child. And that process takes place through the connections we make and through the use of empathy, compassion, and the calm environment. And again, it's important to understand that a child who has experienced trauma, they do not understand empathy. We need to help teach them empathy. Next slide. The energy that needs to be released is survival energy. We want to create the environment for the children to thrive in and not just to survive in. Next slide. Pendulation is a process of restoring the child's natural resilience by assisting in completing the energy cycle, moving through the unpleasant sensations, emotions, and images to the expansion and release. So basically, we need to teach them that the process of awareness and coping to let that uncomfortable feeling go and releasing it rather than holding on to it. And pendulation activities can be found in much of Peter Levine's resources that are mentioned at the end of the presentation. Next slide. When we are vulnerable, we benefit most from feeling a connection with a calm person who is confident of what to do and is able to convey a sense of safety and compassion. And basically that is the sense that we need to give each and every child daily. Next slide. Resolving a stress reaction, it's important to remember that coping skills and resiliencies are developed. They do not have them. And as part of that development, our job is to be that child's trampoline and help them develop their own trampoline. And it will be that helps to create a natural resilience to stress. Next slide.
So, Mary, I think before we do the next slide, because it's the resource, if we go back to that, let's go back to the resolving stress. Just want everybody to think about this. The resolving a stress reaction does much more than eliminate the likelihood of developing trauma later in life. It also fosters an ability to move through any other threatening situation with greater ease and flexibility. It creates, in essence, that natural resilience to stress. Mary's talked about throughout the session about that cycle of the fight, flight, or freeze, and that the coping and working with young children is part of that. If they can break out of that cycle of that's all they ever do, that the coping and resilience is a component of that. So that those skills are what then gives us that ability to help foster that ability to move through life with those skills and have those natural resiliences to stress. So we can go to the next slide.
So the next slide, there are several resources listed on here for you. I want to point out the Body Keeps Score, which is a fantastic resource to hold on to, as well as the ACEs Resource Center, which has information on the ACE study, trauma-informed guides and information, as well as self-assessment tools for you to become familiar with. And I also want to mention Have You Seen Me, which has a lot of resources, free resources that can be used with you as well as the families.
Well, thank you so much, Mary and Tony. Appreciate all the information you have shared. There's lots of information in here. So I'm sure those of you who have joined us for the first time and you're feeling a little overwhelmed, please know that we do record these webinars and the archives are available on our website, which is www.sourceforlearning.org/ECEI. So at any time, either tomorrow or any time, we just leave these archives on our website for you to come back and watch the recording again. And feel free to watch the recording with your staff as well. One thing I will mention, first of all, let me make sure for those of you who will need to log off very quickly, we do have a certificate of attendance for you. It's in the control panel. Please go to the handout section of the control panel. You must be joined by audio and video for you to receive the certificate. So please, we only give certificates at this time to those of you who attend the live session. So right now, please access your certificate from the handout section of your control panel. On the right-hand side of your monitor, you will see the control panel. Some of you have submitted your questions or chatted with us during this session, so it's right in that, and right below that there is either right above or below, because sometimes folks can customize the control panel, but you should see the handout as well as the certificate in that section. Now, many of you have also submitted some questions. We do not have the time right now to go over that with our presenters, but what we will do is we will certainly forward those questions to our presenters. And if something can be addressed very easily, we will add a supplemental material to our website. So it'll be right where you will see the archive of this webinar, the recording, the handout, as well as any supplemental material that we will feel like it will be something of benefit to you all. And if we feel that based on your questions, we actually need to do a follow-up to this webinar, we will certainly plan one for you. So we very much appreciate your time this afternoon or morning, wherever you're located. Our next webinar, please join us again on November 13th at 1 p.m. And the title is Key Strategies for Successfully Creating a Productive Early Childhood Classroom. Feel free to spread the word. We would certainly appreciate that. And again, be social. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We please use our hashtag ECE Professional, ECE Webinar when you promote our webinars. Again, we are a small nonprofit trying to bring some free resources here to early childhood educators. Feel free to connect with us if you would have any questions. Our email is ece-pd@sflinc.org. Once again, I'm going to mention before we log off, the handout section of your control panel has the certificate as well as the handout of this webinar. And any other questions that have come in, we will forward that to our presenters. We will probably add either supplemental materials or we'll plan a follow-up webinar so that a lot of these questions that you have submitted can be addressed. So thank you all, and we hope to see you again very soon. Bye-bye, everyone.